Hammy here, coming to you to talk about energy and how it relates to living things. We're going to start off today just in our first section here of Chapter 4, just energy for life and the role that it plays and how we get it, how we store it, how we use it. Energy is defined as the ability to do work. Okay, so being able to put work, if you look at the physics definition of energy, that's what it is. And as living things, we all need energy. It's needed to do our life processes. So for thinking, for moving our muscles, all those things, and even the things happening in your body that you don't think of, like your heart pumping blood, digesting your food, your stomach squishing around, those all need energy. And to get energy, if you look at the energy pyramid over here, you notice that here on Earth, okay, that energy comes from the sun, and it's kind of elementary, but it goes back. The primary producers are the ones that capture the sunlight, in other words, the plants, and then it passes through the food chains, but you notice that a lot of the energy is lost as heat, okay? 90% of the energy is lost as heat, so only 10% of the energy is available to the next trophic level as we move through the food chain. So the energy issue is a huge thing for living things and acquiring enough energy for those life processes to stay alive. Okay, getting that energy is making food if you're a plant, or as an animal or fungi is finding food, eating food. Okay, food is that solar energy that is stored in chemical bonds, which is a type of potential energy. Okay, so you've learned about kinetic, potential energy, different kinds of energy. Chemical energy would be a type of potential energy where that energy is stored in our bodies until we need it for certain processes. How organisms get their energy, again, fairly elementary here, guys. You have your producers, number one, and your heterotrophs, number two. Your producers are the things that are making their own food. Most of the time, if you look at the diagram over here, okay, you've got the sun, and it's being used by the grass to make their own food. That process is called photosynthesis. And, you know, sorry, I put producers here. They're also called autotrophs. Okay, because they are making trough. Think of a food trough or a feed trough that you're feeding animals. So an autotroph, they're eating out of the trough automatically themselves. So they are making their own food, okay, from sunlight. So that would be plants, green algae, cyanobacteria. The heterotrophs can't make their own food. We're a heterotroph. We can't stand in the sun and make our own food. We need to eat other things, consume other things, eat them. Okay, this includes animals, fungi, and many single-celled animals. There's protists and amoeba, a lot of bacteria. They need to get their food from another source, and it sort of sets up this idea of a food chain, which you've studied before in school, where the energy is passed from organism to organism. When it comes to the energy molecules that is used to store that energy, the main one is going to be glucose. Okay, C6H12O6. We've studied this molecule a little bit before when we were talking about basic chemistry and organic chemistry. Okay, glucose is a carbohydrate, remember, a monosaccharide. It is the monomer used to build bigger molecules, bigger carbs. Okay, it stores chemical energy in a concentrated, stable form. Okay, here's our chemical energy. It's storing the energy together, and it is produced in the process of photosynthesis. If you remember, back to our biomolecules chapter, here's our structural formula. Okay, it can be a straight line, it can be a ring structure, and also we build it with the molecular sets. So here you've got kind of the three-dimensional model of the glucose. Okay, this is our main carbohydrate. This is where our energy is going to be stored, and we store it in our bodies. That's what plants make. That's how plants store it. Okay, for the main sort of energy source. The second energy molecule is adenosine triphosphate. So a lot of times we just abbreviate abbreviate that ATP. Okay, it's the cellular currency for energy. Glucose will store quite a bit of energy, but that's too much for, like, just say a single, when it's used in the muscle cells, or for a neuron, a nerve cell that's firing an impulse. That would be way too much energy. So we just need a little bit of energy. Okay, that would be in the form of ATP. That energy, the actual molecule of ATP, is adenosine. Okay, so the top part up here is going to be a nitrogenous base called adenine. The red pentagon here is a 5-carbon sugar called ribose. So you have adenine and ribose. Okay, adenine, ribose, adenosine. That's sort of where that name comes from. And then obviously triphosphate. Tri means 3. So there's 1, 2, 3. Oh, I apologize for my bad writing here. So 3 phosphates. The energy is stored right here between that second and third phosphate. So you see when we add in water, okay, with a hydrolysis reaction, remember we put them together by taking out a water. So we're going to split that phosphate off by putting a water back in. So you get an inorganic phosphate, and then your DP because it's diphosphate. And now over here, what our cells need over here is our energy. And that is just enough energy, okay, for a lot of our cellular processes. So it's the energy currency. How do we make the glucose in the first place? Okay, well, you have 2 steps, making food and then using food. Making food is the process of photosynthesis, is the main one that we talk about in biology, where you're taking light energy from the sun and you're changing it into chemical energy of glucose. Okay, the formula for that is the plant as a carbon source. We're going to take 6 carbon dioxides. Carbon dioxide, remember, is CO2. The plant is going to combine that or get electrons from water. So, sorry, we have to balance our formula here. 6 H 2 O's. Okay, 6 waters will provide the electrons. Sometimes it's written separately. Sometimes on the line we'll put energy. We can put sun energy or just the sun. It's a little bit easier for me to write in there right now, but we have our input of energy. We'll make our high energy molecule of glucose, which we said was C6H12O6. And then a byproduct of photosynthesis is going to be oxygen gas. So we'll have 6 O2s. And this is the process of photosynthesis. Okay, where the goal is to make a whole bunch of these glucoses, and then they're stored in the plant as starch. So you can see down here simplified structural formula where these things are just strung together, and we get a big long string of glucoses, and that's how the plant stores it as starch. When it comes to using the food, it's just a reverse process. Plants and animals and fungi and bacteria, we're going to take the glucose where the energy is stored, and we're going to slowly break it down. Slowly is a key word there, because if it were released too fast, you just release almost all of it as heat. It would be too much. So we need to break it down in small steps, and we'll look at that later this chapter. Okay, but the formula for cellular respiration is just going to be the opposite of photosynthesis. We're going to take our sugar, our glucose, C6H12O6, and we're going to combine it with 6 molecules of oxygen gas. Okay, that's why you and I need to breathe. Okay, we need the oxygen to deliver to our cells so that they can break down glucose. And it's going to release CO2, which, remember, is brought in our blood back to our lungs, so we exhale. And 6 molecules of water. We call it metabolic water. It's mixed right back into our cell, which we are mostly water anyway. And then we're going to get energy. I'll just put a big old capital E. There's going to be a release of energy. Most of that in the form of ATP. Remember, a lot lost as heat, and then some of it will be captured as ATP for our cells to use. Okay? This is just a reminder, this occurs in plants and animals. Most of the time we think, oh, animals, fungi, they do cellular respiration. Plants do photosynthesis and make the food. Animals and fungi do cellular respiration and use the food. No, plants are making the food because they need it as well. They need energy for life processes too. So plants as well as animals and fungi and others go through cellular respiration. Always remember that. And finally, on our last slide here, we just see, I just want to highlight for you, there are two processes, photosynthesis and cellular respiration when it comes to energy. Notice here is the sunlight, the input of energy, along with water and CO2, if you remember the formulas we just talked about, and it's going to make our glucose, our sugar, okay, which is taken to other places in the plant, or it's eaten by an animal. And it goes through cellular respiration in the mitochondrion is the place where that happens, along with the oxygen gas to make ATP, energy for our cells. Now notice a lot of the heat is given off, and then the CO2 cycles back and back to photosynthesis again. It's given off in the air. Now notice one thing here, just want to point out before I go, that CO2 and oxygen and water will cycle. The elements will, but energy does not. We need a constant input of energy, and it is eventually lost as heat as it moves through the food chains. So the elements will cycle through the different food chains here on Earth and ecosystems. Energy is not. We need a constant input of sun. If the sun dies out, and then we'd be done. Okay. Speaking of done, that's all for this first video, Chapter 4. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a little something.